Okay, today I'll be talking about visual working memory performance and aphantasia. So, the purpose of my presentation is to explain a research article in a way that is easier to understand. So, articles can be very lengthy and wordy. So, this talk is just going to break it down and minimize the confusion. The research article I'll be discussing today is called Visual Working Memory Performance and Aphantasia, and it is by Jacobs et al. 2018. Okay, an overview of this presentation. I'll first go over some terms that may be complicated to an average person, everyday person, um, where the research is at in regard to this topic. Next, I'll be going over the purpose of the current study, why it's important. Then I'll be discussing the methods and get into the article, um, how the participants, what tasks they were put to for the measurements, and then I'll be going over the results of the study very briefly. And lastly, I'll be talking about why this study is important and what to do with the information. So first I want to talk about what aphantasia is. This is a newly coined term actually. From 2015 is when it was actually coined. So aphantasia is a mental condition in which people cannot imagine objects without them being physically in front of them. So for an example, if I say, close your eyes and imagine an apple, most people will be able to close your eyes and see an apple in pretty good detail. An aphantasia individual would not be able to see the object. They wouldn't be able to envision that image of the object that I asked of them. Congenital aphantasia means the condition is a lifelong, starting from birth, and that's what this study will be going over, is an individual that has congenital aphantasia. Next are some terms. So some more terms. Mental imagery is just the mind's eye, or seeing visuals in your mind as an image. Working memory is used, it's a cognitive process, and it's used to perform tasks. So it just stores information temporarily and uses it to perform. It can manipulate the information and use it with different parts of the brain, but it's short-term memory and it's used every day. Visual working memory is part of working memory, but it's the visual aspect of it. So it just works to keep the visual information at easy access for performance. And then metacognition will be used a couple times during this presentation, and it's knowing how well you did on a task and knowing how you perform the task. So it's like reflecting on the task. So where is the research at right now? So people with aphantasia tend to compensate with other cognitive processes to accomplish similar goals of a non-aphantasia person. This has been conducted and studied through fMRI studies that show that a person with aphantasia uses this in this part of the brain to perform the same task as someone who only uses this part of the brain, because their mental imagery is lacking. So they compensate with other areas of their brain to accomplish similar tasks that the everyday person would without aphantasia. There's not very much research on aphantasia because it's a newly coined term. It's kind of a new concept. So there's a lot of room for further development in this topic. And then visual working memory versus mental imagery, they're usually researched separately when they use the similar cognitive processes. So this study will aim to compare and contrast them. So that's where the research is at in that subject. Okay, now to talk about the purpose of this current study. It is just to explore more specific areas of aphantasia, since, like I said, we've only skimmed the surface of this condition, specifically the visual working memory function. Since mental imagery is lacking, it's very important to talk about and learn more about how visual working memory functions in an aphantasia person. It's also to study one case of congenital aphantasia for detailed analysis. So the study will only focus on, instead of like a group of aphantasia individuals, it's focusing on one case so that we can study inside the brain of this one person, inside the mind of them. Next, I'll be talking about methods and the participants. Participants, like I just said, is the one aphantasia individual. She's 31 years old. And then the control participants, there's 11, and they're all female, and they're all 31 years old. Interestingly, there was a subgroup brought in of 4 individuals, and this was created to compile participants with matching IQ scores. So the aphantasia individual had a higher IQ than the control group. So to get a better comparison and have more accurate results, they brought in 4 individuals, and their average IQ is the IQ of the aphantasia individual. The independent variable is the aphantasia individual and the control participants, so the people in the study, and the dependent variable would be the outcomes of the behavior and working memory tasks that they're put to. I'll go through these tasks one by one. So this is just a visual to explain how it went. So there was 3 1.5 to 2 hour sections that were broken up into. So the first 2 tasks, that's why I connected them here with these lines. The first 2 tasks, like the VVIQ and I call it the WAIS-4, they were combined into 2 hour sections. And then there was like a break, and then the next 2 tasks were combined. And then here is just kind of a summary of what the tasks were used for. Okay. So this is a VVIQ, and it's called the Vividness of Visual Imagery Questionnaire. Yeah. And it asks participants to visualize an image and rate the vividness of an image on a scale from 1 to 5 based on 4 different components. Okay, and then for example, I would ask you to rate the vividness of your favorite pair of shoes. So the shoes aren't in front of you, you're just thinking to yourself, like, how vivid can I imagine the top of my shoe, the heel of my shoe, inside and outside of the shoe. So here's my little pictures. This is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale 4. This is what I call the WAIS-4. It's used to collect an overall IQ for the control participants so that they can match the AI's IQ. I pretty much explained this already, but this was just the IQ test they utilized in the study. The WMC battery, so this is the working memory capacity battery, and it's used to evaluate working memory capacity using 4 separate tasks. And this is straight from the study, this visual of the task they were put to. This is the working memory and mental imagery tasks. This is also straight from the research article. It was used to compare visual working memory and mental imagery and assess metacognitive fulfillment. Remember, metacognition is how confident one is in their performance on a task, and if they can recall how they performed. So the next method in the study is called the change detection task, and it was used to inspect how aphantasia affects working memory for multiple feature-bound and single feature-bound percepts. So this sounds very complicated, but I will try to explain. The multiple feature-bound objects can contain several features such as color, shape, size, etc. But single feature-bound objects only contain one visual feature of the object. So like the apple example again, if it's a red apple, one feature of it would be that it's red. So could you remember that it's red? The question the researchers are seeking to answer is, can an aphantasia person store single features in their working memory due to the absence of the need for an object to represent the feature? So like to remember that an object is red, or like see an object is red, you don't have to see the object, you can just see that one feature. Here is straight from the study as well, the task they had them perform. So now we're on to results. Mental imagery seems to be important for high precision working memory and metacognition. This was one conclusion that the researchers came to. So the harder tasks on the working memory, the aphantasia individual did not perform as well, but all the other tasks were equal. So they're saying that their conclusion was that high precision working memory is affected and the metacognition. So her confidence and recalling how exactly she came to the um, answers that she came to was lacking. Aphantasia people's lack of mental imagery can also be compensated for in some circumstances, which was supported from a previous research that I talked about. The aphantasia individual, did significantly worse than controls on the harder working memory tasks, like I just emphasized. So, breaking it down from the methods um, individually, the VVIQ scores ensured that the AI or the aphantasia individual had the aphantasia condition. It was just sort of re emphasizing or reassuring that it was true, I guess. And then the WACE-4 allowed for the researchers to conclude that the AI's general working memory abilities were not impaired. The next one was the working memory capacity. And also, the next method that I'm going to talk about, the working memory and mental imagery tasks, they both kind of came to the same conclusion that working memory capacity is normal, and the aphantasia individual did not underperform compared to the control participants. Okay. So, the implications and conclusion of this study. This study opens a door for further comparison of mental imagery and visual working memory. It just kind of brings light to kind of like a calling for a comparison with these two concepts in cognitive processes. So this condition, as in the aphantasia, it can allow for further research in these cognitive processes. This study broadens our knowledge on the newly identified condition. This study is not perfect by all means. It does sort of open up, it sheds light on more gaps and more paths that you can take further research can take to learn more about aphantasia. The researchers specified that there's so much more specificity to be done regarding this condition. They definitely wanted to get more information on specifics, but you just can't get a whole condition in one study. The subgroup was also fairly small, with 4 people, even though they gave a better representation of the AI, the aphantasia individual, and it was there were great intentions behind bringing that subgroup in. It just was only 4 people, so if there were more people, then further research could have maybe a more accurate comparison. More studies could also conduct studies with multiple aphantasia individuals to see if there are degrees of the condition or if this research stays consistent across all aphantasia individuals. And lastly, here's the reference for the research article. Thank you for listening to me today.